Gabriel here. Another tier list video coming at you. Been a while since I'd done one of these, but we're back on the horse here. This time we're going to be looking at these Stygian artifacts. We've already looked at Hellhorned and Awoken. And I would say, value-wise, I kind of have them somewhere in between the two, probably closer to Hellhorned than I would Awoken. I think there's a lot of good artifacts for Stygian, but there are a few that are bad and a pretty good amount that are just sort of middle of the road or just highly situational. I guess we'll just get into it. No sense beating around the bush. Real quick though, just take a guess at which one you think I'm going to put in first. It's probably the one I was going to put in first, but then I looked at my data and I changed it. Does that change your mind at all? We're going to go with this one. Now, for the record, I have 3 that I've labeled in the S tier. You can guess which ones they are. I've already revealed one. But I will say of the 3 here, ordering's not too important. They're all just really good. But the ordering I'm putting forth is just by order of which ones accounted for the majority of my wins. And the first 2, this one in particular is, Totem Fragment is the name of it. I always forget the name. It's just sort of always takeable, and it always does a ton of work. It definitely accounts for my most wins out of all the Stygian artifacts by a good margin. While also having one of the better win rates, even though it's the most taken one. Since the drop of the DLC, which includes very bad stretches of Stygian play with me, it still accounts for an 82% win rate, which is, 82 to 83 is the highest I have when I go back looking all the way to March with any of these artifacts. It'll just be the S and A tier that get those. But anyway, it's, to really think why it's so good, it doesn't necessarily seem like it's on the level of one other one that you're probably thinking of, but all it needs is some spells that do damage to be useful, and if you're playing Stygian, that's going to be a pretty dang high possibility. And we all know Urchin Spines is a really great card, right? It's a 0 cost, it consumes, and it does literally this effect to the whole floor. So in a way, it makes all of your damaging spells have an Animus of Will worth of multi-strike. Your spells now strike 3 times because of this artifact, assuming that you're aiming them at the top, which you should be if you have this artifact to make use of it. So adding triple strike to all of your, or triple damage, shall we say, to all of your spells turns out to be pretty good. It's pretty redonkulous, actually. Like, all you need is one good spell on holdover, and you basically have deleted the floor each turn. This just does wonders. It solves mini bosses, it kills tanks, turns any old damage spell, it doesn't matter what type it is, AoE, something weird like Ice Storm, something just front-loaded like a Crypt Builder, any of these are going to be deleting everything that they hit. Ancient Synergy is actually probably my favorite one to combo with this. Ancient Synergy, just a beautiful display of just wiping the whole floor out. It's so good. And, that's my number 1. I would actually say that they could nerf this to just do 1 spell weakness and it would still be S tier. That's how good it is. It would still be S tier, I think. You're still doubling the power of your spells. Now, of course, there's nuance there. It's the first spell that hits any enemy, so you gotta be a little crafty there, but it doesn't really take much to basically, have it be doing double damage to everything. The next one, also not yet the one you're probably thinking of, Sigiled Seaweed. Similarly to this one, it's just sort of always takeable and always doing a lot of good work. I'll spoil it for the third S tier ones are going to be Founding Seal, so maybe we can talk about why I still think these rank a little bit better than Founding Seal. It's not because of the ceiling, it's just because of the median and the floor. I think, when I look at my data, these two account for way more wins than Founding Seal does. That could just be the variance that I don't seem to get offered Founding Seal that much for long stretches at a time, but there are times that I do have to skip Founding Seal because I just simply don't have an incant deck. It's rare, but it happens. Whereas like skipping these just seems like it would never come up. I might take something that's better than them, but I would never just straight up skip these. Sigiled Seaweed, you can't necessarily rely on it to always do something for you, but the fact of the matter is, out of all the like 50% chance to do thing type artifacts, this one just to me is far and away the best. Silence is so powerful, and to just have that hit 50% of the time is so powerful. This is way, way better of a counter to Scourges than the actual Scourge artifact, Sinner Salve. It's just better. Like actually silencing the unit and preventing them from killing your draws, silencing Purifiers, silencing Absolvers. Just so good. And it has a 50% chance to, solve a lot of the minor bosses. Not that Living Armor is hard, but this having a 50% chance to silence it, pretty hilarious when it does happen. Like that dude ain't gonna do anything to you if that hits. But there's other bosses too that silence hits good on. It's not good on Ring 5 because those are all buff based, but it could still be good on Ring 5 sometimes. Like if the Sycophant comes in behind the Multi-Striker and you have AoE, it could definitely help there. But, Ring 4, it really helps. Party Boy is by far the hardest boss. I think the hardest minor boss in the game, if you're taking any amount of shards. And this pretty much hard counters it at 50% of the time. And really all of, even to a certain extent, the dude that slays on, gets Scourges on slays, the other Ring 4 boss that can be silenced. It's a decent silence there. But yeah, mainly just, if anything, for the Purifiers, all the Scourge Shufflers, it's so useful there. Also, overcharged tanks, or the Eagle tanks, whatever they're called. Darkwings, I think. Darkwing Duck. They're always going to be there in Divinity, and the fact that you have a 50% chance to silence that just awful effect that they have is just god tier. And this one, by the way, actually has my highest win rate of all my Stygian artifacts, just by 1%. But yeah, it's also, Totem Fragment was well out ahead, but Sigiled Seaweed similarly is well out ahead of the rest. This is kind of like, these two here are, they're above 30 wins. Everything, the closest, next is actually not even Founding Seal. It's Tethys Scales, but we'll get to that later. I didn't put Tethys in my S tier. I could maybe justify it, but let's get on to the other one. I'm gonna guess everyone thought maybe this is the first one, and that, if I hadn't looked at my data, my first notion would be, yeah, this is the best Stygian artifact. And maybe it is. Like I said, my top 3 are all, you could treat them as equal. There's not much point in teasing them out, but I thought, I'm either not remembering the times I skip it, or I just am not getting offered it much. For whatever reason, it's significantly less accounting for total wins than these other two artifacts. So that's why I have it slightly below them. But I wouldn't say it's like S- tier or anything. I would just say all 3 of them are S+ tier. They're 3 of the best artifacts in the game. Huge reasons to look for artifacts when you are Stygian. And what can you really say about Founding Seal? Of all the sort of do an effect twice type artifacts, it's probably between this and Ashes the Fallen for me on which one's the best, but it's just so good. It makes your any incant unit is gonna just get bonkers value from this, and it even makes like, the Siren infusions into other units that don't have incant sort of innately in their kit. Say you have a sweeper and you want to put a Siren of the Sea onto it. Without Founding Seal, that can often be pretty underwhelming, but with Founding Seal, now you got a fucking stew going. Baby, you got a stew going now. You're getting 2/2 per incant. just literally doubling the value of incants is crazy. They should probably nerf this along with a lot of the other, like Ashes of the Fallen should probably get nerfed too. Like, I think there should probably be a limit on like how many this hits. I mean, it doesn't make much sense to me that like, whatever this one's called, what is it called? Forgotten Name. That one has a limit, but this doesn't. That doesn't make any sense. It only makes sense if the intention there is to have artifacts just sort of objectively be better than the others. But either way, the fact that I'm talking that it needs to be nerfed says all you need to know about it. It's just a bustedly good artifact. When you get it, I'm not saying I haven't lost with it. And I've been looking at here, and I've lost 4 times with it apparently since March. But still, that's because I'm dumb. It's not because this is bad. This is so powerful. Just stupid. What more can I say about that? And that's the S tier. And I only really have one at the A tier, and it honestly probably could be, it's somewhere like S minus A plus tier. It's another one of these 50% type artifacts, similar to Sigiled Seaweed, but it's really good still. Like, and it actually, I have more wins with this than I have with Founding Seal. Tethys Scales, so. But I don't know, it seemed pretty hard for me to look, just look at Founding Seal and what it provides to the table and say that it's in the same realm as Tethys Scales, which, and even comparing it to Totem Fragment, it's like you're most of the time shooting these units when they get to the top anyway. So in that context, it's like, it's basically, you could almost, read it as the same as like units enter the top and they just have a 50% chance to get the, spell weakness. Essentially, in a lot of my runs, that's essentially the same, but sometimes it isn't. Sometimes being able to shoot them on the lower floors, especially like purifiers, if I have weaker backline removal, it can be useful there. So it has an edge, somewhat of an edge there, in some ways, but in general, just shows the power of this spell weakness. Like I said, I think Tethys Scales being so good is proof positive that you could probably nerf Totem Fragment down to 1 spell weakness guaranteed, and it still is just really good. Because this is just 1 spell weakness versus the two, and this is not guaranteed, whereas this is guaranteed. And even then, 50% just to apply 1 spell weakness on entry ends up being so good. 50% of the time you do double damage with a spell. Yeah, that's good. It's great, in fact. But is it on the level of these? That I don't know. It might be. It might just round out to being about there, but I have it in A tier just on a practical level. It just doesn't really read out on paper as strongly as these do. And then I would say there's a significant drop off after there. These 4 to me are the real sexy, real nice, real just always, I almost always want to see these on a Stygian run. I mean, hell, I'd want Sigiled Seaweed on any run. But, now we're getting to more situational stuff. I have Icicle Fracture here. I didn't know where to put this one. Back in the, prior to the DLC, I found more use for it. I don't find as much use for it anymore. It's still really good. But I don't know. It doesn't necessarily play. This could come down to a play style thing as well. I'm one of the people that like Forgone powers, so it's often not necessarily like when you play Forgone powers and you lean into them, you just don't end your turn with things in your hand. And if you're not doing that, then Icicle Fracture really doesn't make any sense, right? But, when the times, if you're playing random, you might just get the lances. And, if you're not able to clear out your hands, or alternatively, if you have a reason to try to permafrost things, and you can just play out the rest of your hand and purposely permafrost something this way, then it's a really good artifact. It's not one that I feel is necessarily just a middle-of-the-road artifact. It's either going to be giving you S-tier value, or it's just not going to make your deck. To me, it often just doesn't make it into the deck, or it does and just doesn't really do anything. So it's a hard one to evaluate. Technically, it's a very good artifact, but if your playstyle typically is just wanting, like to me, if I'm really playing Stygian, the way that Stygian likes to be played, in my opinion, I'm playing as many spells as I can every turn, which usually means I play out my entire hand. You know, I'll shoot into the wind, not even shooting at units, just so I trigger incants on my floor. I'm just rapid firing all my spells off on my floor. I don't care if there's enemies on it or not, which kind of goes to show that Icicle Fracture often just isn't going to make sense in my style of decks that I build Stygian with. So, you know, take it with a grain of salt. This will make sense if you don't empty your hands out a lot, right? Similarly, this one, these are the only two I put in the D tier. This is a Kinhost Totem. It's really good in the deck that it makes sense in. It's an infinite enabler for sure. I think I don't typically target infinites that much, so that's part of it. B, I'm just not that like super well versed on them yet. Like if it's a daily, I'll go for it. But in my normal Covenant 25 play, I'm very rarely looking for infinites. And I'd say this definitely for me, it gets me S tier value if I have Offering Monument. If I have Offering Monument, and you know, particularly if I have Forgone powers to combo with it, this is like bonkers good. It's as good as any of these S tier artifacts, if not better, in what it's going to provide to me. But in my normal style deck, where I'm not really going for an infinite, and I'm not really going for, or I don't have an Offering Monument, it can often just not find me value. A lot of time, like, it's not going to really find me value in like a Conduit Tethys deck, right? But it still can find me value. Like if I have a holdover spell-chained, offering, token, this is still really good with that, right? You're still netting one positive ember by playing it. So it's definitely good when it's good, but it's useless when it's not, right? Even if, if I have no sort of holdover, offering token, or I don't have an Offering Monument, even in a Forgone powered deck, it just doesn't do much for me. I'd have to like, every now and then I can make use of that ember, but a lot of the times I'm playing out my hands anyway. It didn't matter if I had extra ember or not. Or also I'd have to like play my Forgone power and have it not discard the card that I need to play to even make it work. So a lot of times it's like, it might give me the ember I needed, but then I'll throw away the card that I was going to play anyway. So I think it often just is, it's similar to Icicle Fracture. Maybe I'll jump it above. I feel like when this one hits, it hits much harder than Icicle Fracture. But they're similar. They're just either S tier or not doing much for you. Now this one was hard for me to evaluate. Forgotten name. If you go by my data, it actually should be B or A tier, but I just can't. I just can't. Like, it's one of those where it's like, I guess I'll add it. It seems to come up for me a lot. I think that's the only reason it's showing up so much in my data. I can't imagine this is actually a good artifact. It's an okay one, but it's just so limited. Like, you have to basically go through 3 entire turns, before it even matches what the, I forget the name, but whatever, the neutral artifact that gives you +3 magic power. And that's not even a good artifact, like, at all. So like, eventually in a long fight, yeah, you'll be eventually maybe doing anywhere from 8 to 10 extra spell damage with it. But by then, the fight's usually solved anyway. I don't know. I wanted to put it in D tier, if I'm being honest, but the fact that it's funny. It has it has just, let's see. Yeah, it's just under Founding Seal and how many wins it does for me. And it actually, has the same win rate as both, 83% win rate with it. So it's like, technically it performs well. I can't tell you why. When I look at it on paper, it's bad. It doesn't feel good when I play it. I'll tell you this, it would be a really good one if it actually didn't limit once per turn. I don't know why it doesn't, honestly. It doesn't seem like it'd be that broken. I mean, an infinite is an infinite. If you have an infinite, it'll kill everything that turn anyway. So if the worry is that like infinites would make it too strong, well, I would say that that's not really true, because an infinite's going to one shot. It's basically killing on that turn anyway, right? No matter what you have. Otherwise, it's like, yeah, I'll incant. If I can incant 6 times a turn, I should be rewarded for that with this, in my opinion. I should get 2 extra spell damage. Why not? The Wormkin equivalent of this card is not limited once per turn, so I don't know. That should change. Now the next one, Cuttlebeard. This one, I liked it a lot more prior to the DLC. This one probably would have made my A tier then, maybe even S, honestly. But you know, the hit to Frostbite is definitely felt here. Granted, it'll make Frostbite a lot better, and in 2 particular scenarios, I think it's a very good artifact still. If you have your endless self-infused Titan Sentry, I think that's really good. And then obviously also, probably, I think it's pretty good for, why can't I think of the name? Cold Channel Soulguard. Yeah. Even though, you know, it gets to ridiculous amounts of Frostbite, per application anyway, having a few extra to start off with, especially the earlier it is still pretty welcome. And the fact that the Frostbite doesn't decay, that can be pretty good. But yeah, it's, you know, in the Divinity world, it's still pretty good, I think. Like I said, with the Titan Sentry, it's probably A tier, I would say. Otherwise, I don't know, C to D tier. It's either going to make sense or it's not. If your only Frostbite application is Forgotten Powers, like, it's pretty good early, but it falls off pretty quick. I think just very often it's not making sense for decks. And then on a similar note of Frostbite, we have Rules of Containment. This is one that is pretty damn sad in the DLC, I would say. This is a good candidate, in my opinion, for a new keyword that basically, whatever the keyword is, you know, I'll let somebody more creative come up with a name for it, but the keyword would basically come accompanied with a shard count, and when you hit that shard count, it could be unique to each artifact, by the way, or even a champion as well, but or a champ path, but we'll focus on artifacts right now. I think when you hit that certain shard count, it will unlock basically the next level of the artifact, and I think Rules of Containment is a great candidate for that, because here's the thing, it doesn't kill jack shit in the game mid to late game once you've taken shards. It kills nothing. Maybe it kills something if you couple it with Cuttlebeard, but if you're coupling this with Cuttlebeard, to me, that should actually be insane. That should be like, oh man, I really high rolled here, hit the 2 Frostbite artifacts together. This should be really good, but it's not. It still kills like 1. I think it only kills 2 of the units in the Divinity fight on its own, having both of them together. So, fuck that. It's so bad. 2 Frostbite is a joke, an absolute joke. Doesn't even kill anything in the Talos the Pusher fight. Like, it's passable early. It's like a bad Jackstrips. And I guess for Divinity, if you do, 50% of the time you'll start with the damage shielded dudes. It'll break those damage shields. That's okay. But in general, it's so underwhelming. So often it just doesn't do anything for you. And if it's an artifact that you take that didn't really have any ceiling, there's really no ceiling here, right? Where's the ceiling of Rules of Containment? There is none. The ceiling is that you can do 5 non-decaying Frostbite with it if you couple it with Cuttlebeard. That's it. That's a shit ceiling. A ceiling of not even killing Shade Wings and Light Wings in the Divinity fight. I'm sorry, but that's a horrible ceiling. You can tell I'm passionate about this one. There's just a few of these artifacts where I'm like, this needs to change. Unless the idea is that they just want bad artifacts. If that's the case, then cool. This will be a bad artifact, I guess. And then there's another one I would mark into that. But the next one I wouldn't say is necessarily bad. This is one I used to really like. Titan's Claws or whatever you call them. Technically it is good, but I never need it anymore. I used it a lot prior to the DLC, similarly because I would couple it with like Icicle Fracture. I think also a huge thing here, probably the single biggest thing here, is the fact that Ice Tornado used to be a good card. Like, it was a really good card because it was, it came permafrosted and it would just get down to 0. But now Ice Tornado sucks in my opinion. It's a pretty bad card. Sometimes you take it early to help with the early game, but by the time Divinity rolls around, that card is useless. Absolutely useless. So I really don't care about getting things down to 0. And then similarly to why, like, this really comes down to playstyle. I find myself loving Forgotten Powers, and I use them. So I think a lot of people, they really value permafrost, whereas I think I don't really value permafrost as much as a lot of people do. I think it can be good, but it's often ironically, if I permafrost something, it would just be an offering target. Just so, like, if I miss it, I can play it and get the value out of it, guaranteed the following. Not guaranteed, but, like, I'm likely to eventually get value out of it instead of just letting it pass through the deck. Like, that's honestly, when I play Stygian, what I usually permafrost. Other than that, though, it's like, I don't know, it would be okay with, like, Preserve, but, again, I'm typically playing out all my hands anyway, so the way I construct a deck just never is conducive to Titan's Claws. So it's like, there is a ceiling with Titan's Claws that is good, right? Like, you can have a lot of high cost cards, and this works with a lot of stuff that you could get creative with it, right? Like, you could permafrost a Shadow Siege and now you can play it, or a Consumer of a Crowns, One Horn's Tome, cards like this, you can use it to cheat them out. So there is like this incredible ceiling for it, but I never do it. So, playstyle thing, I don't think it's a bad artifact, but for me, I can't sign off on an artifact that literally, when I go back to March, accounts for 7 wins. Literally 7 wins, so, yeah, I clearly don't use it, so it's gotta be in my D tier. And then I have this one as the worst one. Token of a Traitor. Another one that really needs that keyword, whatever it may be, that can unlock a better version of it, because it's so bad. So bad. It should at least pop Spell Shield. If it popped Spell Shield, this would be fucking good. Because Spell Shield is annoying. If you didn't roll into Pierce on your Divine Temples, Stygian can have a fucking nightmare of a time with Divinity, because for whatever reason they splattered Spell Shield on every goddamn wave past 2. Just fuckloads of Spell Shield. Now, if this broke Spell Shield, boom, I'd pop it up to A, maybe, but it doesn't. And yeah, it pops Damage Shield, but I don't know. Damage Shield isn't that prevalent. The big thing is Spell Shield. Damage Shield, it's like, if I think about Divinity, it's like wave 1, 50% of the time you see it. Otherwise, do you even see it at all? I don't think you do. But like, many of the mini boss, and there's some mini bosses, by the way, that have like 7 million stacks of Spell Shield, like the fucking Sweeper boss. So, I don't know. To me, like, if this could, a simple change here, you don't even have to buff the card necessarily on damage, but if they just made it so it pops Spell Shield, I guess it doesn't necessarily make sense that it would, but a man can dream, right? If it did that, it'd be a good one. But as it stands, it's horrible. It's so unreliable. It doesn't do hardly any damage. Early game is the only time you'll find value out of it. It's very, very similar to Teeth of Gold. Maybe not that bad, but it's pretty similar. Same damage output. It's random. It's horrible against flying bosses. Not that by the time you get to them, the damage is relevant anyway. Like I said, similar to, it's basically worse than Rules of Containment. And if you think about it, at least Rules of Containment does 3 damage flat to every floor guaranteed. This does 3 damage randomly when you play a spell. You may or may not get it to the back line. You may just put it on the tanks, and yeah, it'll tickle them. Horrible, horrible, horrible artifact. One of the worst in the game. Token of a traitor. It's a traitor indeed. A traitor to the cause when you see that one in your pick instead of something like this. But yeah, that'll do it for the Stygian artifacts. Always curious to what your thoughts are. Any major disagreements, any surprises. Dissenting opinions are always welcome. In fact, they're the most fun, so bring it on. Though I won't say no to, scratching my back as well and telling me, yeah, that's good. Yeah, you're right. You're right, Gabriel. Either way, as long as you just say anything. The worst is when there's just no comments. That's the worst. Make whatever comment. I don't even care. You don't even have to talk about artifacts. Just talk about something you think is cool. Just make a comment. I'm not begging you. I'm just suggesting. But anyway, that'll do it for this one. As always, thank you for watching. Truly thank you for watching. I mean, it's, when you're working with a smaller game like this, you go through these phases where it's like, okay, I mean, I'm just doing this for fun, right? This is not like a career path. It'll never be. It can't. That ship sailed for me, I think. Who cares? Whatever. Let's just call it good here. Thanks for watching, and much love. Until next time, peace.